There we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I know that there is a lot of interesting topics going on, so thank you for choosing to be here. And this too is an interesting topic, of course. My name is Emira Blomberg, and I have been working with recruitment for the past 15 years in some shape or form. So now everybody is trying to figure out how old I am. And you're probably doing a character analysis of me as well. You're all HR people. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? If you want to slip me a development plan when I leave, it's fine. Thanks. I have been spending the last 15 years working with recruitment in some shape or form. I started as a recruitment consultant at an agency. I worked with an HR department in Sweden's largest insurance company. I was a headhunter, executive search. I worked in commercial roles, managerial roles, organizational design, and now I am working at RefApp. And RefApp provide a tool for digital reference checking. So I work with product development and strategy, and I'm having a lot of fun doing that. And what you need to master in order to be a successful recruiter, that's such a large topic, right? It's such, I could go on for hours. And this is actually my first time covering the whole perspective of recruitment within 1 hour. So you get to witness the premiere here as well. So bear with me if I get off track. So what made me spend these 15 years deep diving into this topic? Well, basically, it comes down to, let's see if I get the clicker to work. The hiring decision, right? It's such an interesting decision, isn't it? It's like a definite decision in an ever-changing world, right? It's super, super hard. And there's a lot of room for improvement here. And I guess that's what has, been keeping me going. There's a lot of room for improvement, both when it comes to the organizational perspective, the way organizations or the hiring manager makes that decision, but also ourselves, how we make the decision about our careers. Not because some uncle told us that we might be good at something or anything else that doesn't really relate to what would suit me. So this is a really, really, I think, for me, and for all of you, something to really master, and it's hard and it's difficult. And why do I say that we are bad at it? Why would I say that? Well, let's look at some numbers. I know there's a lot of things going on within the iGaming, and you're looking at the US. So if we look at US employee engagement and turnover and some numbers there, we see that we have 34% of all US employees are engaged in their work or in their workplace. That's pretty low numbers, right? And does this have to do with bad hiring decision? Well, it's not that simple, of course not. It's a lot of things, that affect the engagement crisis. And the engagement crisis has been going on for some time. Somebody here maybe have read Frederick Laloux, Reinventing Organizations, and that paradigm shift from the orange to green and teal organizations. That was the engagement crisis that really pushed that shift to happen. Because we need other things from our workplaces in order to feel engaged. And actually, there is this psychological model called self-determination theory that says that we need 3 things in order to be engaged. We need to be autonomous, and to feel autonomous, we need to feel connected, and we need to feel competent. And that's how we will be motivated and feel engaged. But still, I can't help but thinking that there's a lot to the hiring decision as well. I think we're recruiting the wrong people for the wrong positions, basically. We also have, the great resignation, the reshuffle. Turnover rate is expected to be as high as 24% for a single company in the US. That's really, really high, of course. And 16% are disengaged in their work, actively disengaged. And they will display toxic behavior. And just think about what that does for an organization. So there's a lot of room for improvement, of course. And these numbers are also, of course, I think it's important for us within recruitment to start looking more at numbers. We need to behave more like VC people. When they invest in something, they have, all these kinds of metrics and all these kinds of insights that will lead to the decision whether they will invest or not. Like the US dollar is really, really strong. What does it mean? And we need to behave in the same way because we need to start connecting the dots because we're living in a crisis of crisis time, basically. And this affects us all. And we're heading for a recession. And what does that mean for talent acquisition? So a lot of things are going on, right? We have the COVID crisis, the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, the impact of war, environmental crisis, political crisis. And what happens in times of crisis and in times of recession is that the supply chain breaks, right? But the supply chain was already broken because we've all had those two problems the last 5-10 years, that one, there's not enough candidates, and two, we can't hire them fast enough, right? You're nodding? Yeah? Yeah, so the supply chain is obviously broken. And I think also we need to be more proactive when we think about talent acquisition and our candidate pipeline. And we need to divide the candidate pipeline into two types of pipelines, basically. And one is the supply chain hire. And this is the people that we always will need in our organization, about 80%. That we always know that we will need these kinds of people, these kinds of roles, these kinds of positions. We will need to fill them, right? And in times of crisis and in times of recession, what happens is that you get the start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. Now you can hire, now we can't hire, now you can hire, now we can't hire. So we need to really have the supply chain going on, so when we get the green light, we can move fast, right? And the supply chain, we can look into the job profile a little bit later, but here's also, we need to think about other kinds of profiles in our supply chain in order to be able to maintain a supply chain that is actually relevant for us when we get the green light. But we can't have the supply chain for a CPO or for, some kind of specialist role that we very seldom recruit for. So then we need some kind of campaign hire, right? So these are maybe the other 20% of our company, where we need to go to our hiring managers, go to our CEOs and says, okay, these hires don't fit within our regular budget. We need to spend more money on ads or campaigns or targeted ads or referral programs or something else than our ordinary supply chain hire. Just being conscious of time. So let's look at the job profile also, because it is hard to build a pipeline, right? And I think this is what it all comes down to, why we make the bad decisions, because the job profile looks the way it looks. And I think it comes down to the fact that somewhere along the way, we forgot about what performance is. What is performance? What does good look like? And that might be harder than you think. It's It's obvious. Someone is performing. He or she is doing a good job. But what does it mean to do a good job? And I would like you to, I'm going to show you 4 images. I would like you to discuss for 30 seconds, 2 and 2 or 3 and 3, depending on how you're sitting, what performance is based on this picture, okay? So what is performance? 30 seconds. Yeah, okay, 30 seconds. So what is performance? Someone who likes to give it a shot. It's no one? No? Cutting down the hay in time, right? When the hay is gone, that's when the job is done, right? So doing that on time, that's performance, right? Pretty simple. You knew that. Okay, so next one. What is performance? 30 seconds, go. Okay, 30 seconds. Someone wants to share now?
Sewing.
Sewing. Being able to do really monotonous work over and over and over and over again. It can be sewing, it can be something else, but it's really monotonous work, right? Okay. Now it gets trickier. 30 seconds. What is performance? Yeah? Maybe you would need a whole hour for this, but you don't get that, so. So what is performance? Tricky, right? Is it the amount of code that that person is producing? Is it the quality of the code? Is it hybrid workspace, remote work, showing up and not laying on the couch, doing nothing instead? What is it? Okay, and the last one. 30 seconds. What is performance? Yeah, okay. So here it gets even trickier, right? Maybe it's what you talked about earlier, right? Being able to work with other people who might think and behave and act in other ways that you do. But my point is, and you can also see that we have, stuff has happened. right? When it comes to what performance actually looks like. And so it's no wonder it's hard for us to evaluate if someone is fit for a job or not, right? Because we don't know what it actually looks like when a person is performing. And the hiring manager doesn't always know this either. So this is something that we really, really have to think about when we create the job profile, right? So performance is a set of behavior. We all, talked about behavior, I guess, being this, appearing like that, doing this. So performance is a set of behavior. And what we can observe, behavior is what we can observe above the surface, right? It's what we can see. We can actually see someone else is doing. But what's below the surface and what affects our behavior, that's what we really are trying to evaluate and assess in a recruitment process, right? So what's below the surface? Knowledge and experience. And this is where most job profile starts, right? You need to have this kind of knowledge, you need to have this kind of experience, and these are often hard skills and they are must-haves most often, right? So this is what we call readiness. We decide on, or we try to figure out how ready someone is to start performing tomorrow, right? So that's readiness based on knowledge and experience. But what's tricky about knowledge and experience in an ever-changing world is that it becomes obsolete really, really, really fast, and faster and faster and faster, right? So I think it's McKinsey that says change is the only constant, but there's one more thing that's constant, or quite constant, and that's cognitive ability and personality. So this is our potential, or the potential data, right? And this is something that we know is stable over time. Personality, and if you're going to measure personality when you recruit, you should use a 5-factor tool. Other kinds of tests or tools like DISC and Myers-Briggs and these kinds of tools, they are really good tools for development purposes, for getting to know one another, for playing around with the fact that we are different, but we still need to coexist and so on. But they are not to be used for evaluating personality when it comes to actually predicting performance. If you're going to try and predict performance, you should use a 5-factor tool, and you should measure what cognitive ability, or GMA, a general mental ability. So that's the potential, right? Then, of course, we have drivers and needs. You can't do a job if you're not motivated for it, right? Or you can, but you won't, right? So we also have to think about the can I do the job, and do I want to do the job? Because those are two separate things, right? And of course, drivers and needs are also important, but research shows, or rather, research is a bit here. It's not that clear what actually, what impact drivers and needs actually has on performance. But we know that if we are in a setting where we are not aligned with our drivers and needs, we will feel demotivated and we will start to feeling disengaged, unengaged. So this is what's below the surface, right? But we can only observe the behavior. And don't get me wrong, this is also, of course, behavior can be stretched, right? So it doesn't mean that if you're born in a certain way, you can't behave in another way. We can always behave in another way. We can stretch our behavior like a rubber band. So if I start here, I can stretch here, or I can stretch here. We can do more, or we can do less of displaying a certain trait, for example. Someone yesterday, I think, in the diversity and inclusion stage was talking about authenticity. And we don't go to work and be our authentic selves. We go to work and we bring our authentic selves somewhat, but we always, put the role jacket on us as well. So behaviors can be stretched, but we also know that when we can find a job fit, that will mean that the person can just act in his or her natural behaviors, and that will lead to performance. That is also something that will last longer over time. And of course, knowledge and experience is not unimportant. It's not important, right? Of course it's important. But it's not as important as we think. So if we flip the iceberg, here is the organizational iceberg upside down. So we have the purpose, vision, and the culture in an organization. An organization starts with a purpose, with a vision and a culture. And if it's a startup, it's the CEO who is the culture, right? His or her behavior is the culture. And then we have the strategy and operations that we lead to us reaching our goals, and we break those down into roles, right? So what we need to find is, of course, this. So this is the iceberg again. There's the person with the cognitive ability and personality, knowledge and experience, and drivers and needs. And we need that kind of match in order to get job fit and culture fit. So culture fit is more about, do I want to do the job? Will I feel included? Will I feel that I share the values of my company? And now some of you will say, what about culture add? And of course, culture add is also important, but you need to know then what you're adding against or what you're adding to. And because culture add will mean friction. And friction is like the birth mother of innovation, right? But if we don't realize that, it will just be friction. So every time we think about culture add, we need to be really, really aware of what are we adding, right? Diversity and inclusion is not only about, accepting everybody, anything goes, because the truth is that anything doesn't go, right? We need to behave in a certain way in order to actually perform. But we're focusing on the wrong things. Demographic factors has nothing to do with culture fit. Just saying that. And things are happening. I mean, this was, I think, 2011 or something, when Laszlo Bock said that we're not hiring from Ivy League. We don't want people with Ivy League degrees because they are worthless as a criteria for hiring. No correlation with performance, except if there are brand new college grads. There's a slight correlation then. So it's happening. And this was also something that really kicked off, the more hire for potential, train for skills, which we have been talking about for a long, long time, right? The problem is if we're hiring for potential and then once inside a company, there's no training for skills, then it won't work, right? So we need like greenhouse initiatives, or we need apprenticeships. I think we'll see more of these going forward. Just being conscious of time. So let's look a little bit at the process and tools. What are the means that we actually, what can we use in order to be able to make a better hire decision? And here's also a bit of a problem. So I'm standing here just, talking about the problems. For example, when it comes to the resume and the cover letter, just look at that headline, how to write a resume for a first job. I mean, that's a ridiculous headline in the first place. How do you write a resume for a first job? You can't do that because you have nothing to write, right? But you still need to do it. So what happens is that people are starting to try and trick the system. So like, if you include some keywords, this will help you stand out over other candidates. Applicant tracking systems will help employers filter resumes they received. So what actually happens is that they will write these keywords, sometimes even in white letters on a white background, so they are not visible to the eye, but they are detected with an ATS. So why not just, accept that this is not a good way of presenting the data for whether if you're a good fit or not for the role. And the same with cover letter. And it's not, I mean, the information in a cover letter can be really, really relevant, can be. But the way it is presented to us is filled with biases and filled with stupid things that will make us make stupid decisions, basically. Assessments, and this is what I was working with before I joined RefApp. I was working for an assessment company, and there's a lot of myths going around assessments, right? It's like, for some few people that can interpret this kind of data, it's really, a little club for people who can interpret the data. But here is something actually happening, that the assessment companies are starting to go from heavy loaded reports to more thumbs up or thumbs down, or percentage of match scores. Is this a good fit for the job or not? So we don't have to interpret and make decisions based on our intuitive gut feeling. So this is actually something that is going on now, and I think it's really exciting to see how we can be more insights-driven with the help of assessments. And the interview as well. I mean, the candidate will Google, right? They will Google best handshake for an interview, and you will get, what, 13 million results, right? And also, a good handshake is full and firm, where you grasp the entire hand and squeeze in a firm but non-aggressive way. I mean, this is also, it's all for show, and we all know that people who are more extroverted will be perceived as more, that they perform better in an interview, and so on. So, but the interview is actually a really good predictor of performance if done right. If a structured interview is actually a better predictor of performance than most other kind of tools that we use. But it needs to be structured. The questions needs to be based on a job analysis, and we need to ask the same questions to every candidate, and we need to use standardized scales when we rate them in order for it to be a structured interview. So I'm sure that you've all seen this kind of workflow where recruitment is treated as an isolated process. And it still is, right? It's treated as an isolated process, but we know that it shouldn't be, right? It should be a part of the whole employee journey. And we should be able to close the feedback loop and feed insights from inside our company, the talent management, and it would be like this feedback loop. We need to create a feedback loop, but we don't. We lack the tools to do that, and that's basically also because a lot of the ATSs are not integrated with the HR systems in the correct way, and somewhere along the way the data gets lost. So, but there are, what do you say, glimpses on the horizon? Do you say that in English? Yeah, okay, great. We start to see also these kinds of programmatic ads, like ad tools will pick up on where the ad had most effect and where the candidate actually came from, what keywords to include, and it would start to self-generate as a flow of its own. The same with assessments and sourcing tools. There's still a lot of improvements to be done with the interview. I think that's we will see the most happening within the interview area going forward. I think we will see a lot of interview analytics going forward, because this is a really underinvested area right now. So, the future of recruitment, if I go back also, it's a lot about it's process step driven. You see what I mean? It's Now we're in this process step, sourcing process step. Now we're in this process step, selection process step. So it's a lot of process step driven, but it should be really, it should be more insights driven. I will skip that and go to that one. It should be more like insights driven, right? Data is like oil, right? So if not processed, we don't know how to use it. It's like crude oil. So we need to stop talk about data-driven recruitment and start to talk about insights-driven recruitment. When I enter a process step, whether it's the interview or it's the CV screening or it's whatever it might be, we need to know what kind of data do I need to get from this particular process step. Why is this process step even in the recruitment process for this particular job? And what kind of insights do I need in order for me to be done with that process step? I think that's the most important thing, actually. So not just, do the way you always did, of course. And we challenge ourselves all the time, right? And this is hard. But I think that's really, really important. So we will see more of the data insights-driven process when it comes to recruitment, rather than the process step-driven recruitment. Now I'm entering the selection stage. Now I'm entering the assessment stage. Now it doesn't work like that, right? Everything is connected to everything. And there will be also in the future, for example, tools that you can use, and you write down your job profile and you say, I want a software developer with 6 years of experience, and I want him or her to be proficient in this language, and I want to pay this much. And the tool will say, okay, 6 months is time to hire for this position. So then you take away one hard skill and the tool will say, okay, this will take 4 months time to hire. And these kinds of tools we will be seeing more of these kinds of tools going forward. And also with the feedback loop, we will hopefully connect the dots even from the inside out and not just from the outside in as we do today. So we need new data points. We need to look more into potential, personality, cognitive ability, and less into knowledge and experience, because we know that they become obsolete. And it will go faster and faster. So we need new data points, and we need to enable insights as well. So, the tools going forward, I work with one of these tools. I work with product development and strategy for one of these tools for reference checking. Reference checking is late in the process, but still, we have certain kind of demands when we develop these tools in order for us to be relevant. And they need to be simple to use. They need to be simple to use and simple to understand so that recruiters and talent acquisition managers are not a bottleneck. So that hiring managers can use the tools themselves. For example, I have a friend who works within a large organization, and she says, I just want the hiring manager to be able to do this from the ATS by him or herself. So we need to kind of plug and play these kinds of tools. And we need to enable these kinds of tools for people who are not experts on the subjects. Because as long as we, as experts on the subject, are the bottleneck, we'll never get that effect that we want, right? And we need tools that enables us to trust the data. I'm sure you've read Kahneman with Thinking Fast and Slow, and mechanical interpretation and holistic or intuitive interpretation. And if you haven't, just short brief. So we have two systems in our brains. We have the system thinking fast and the system thinking slow. So it's the chimpanzee brain and the professor brain. you can call them. And what happens when we fall into our biases traps is that we use system one, the fast system, the one that enables us to take shortcuts and to categorize and to really make fast decisions. Because we need to do that, right, in order to survive as humans. But the professor brain professor brain enables us to think through things. And it's also the professor brain who helps us look as we are not irritated when we actually are. So the professor brain is the slow in thinking fast and slow. So it's obvious what brain to use when we make recruitment decisions, right? So why don't we just use system 2, thinking slow? Well, it's not that simple, because that system is really, it's demanding a lot of calories. So it's hard for us to use that system. So the brain will automatically try and kick us back into thinking with system 1, because it's cheaper for us. So we need to step away from intuitive, holistic interpretation, and we need to rely more on mechanical interpretation. And we need to do that early in the process, because then otherwise it's too late. It's already, the pipeline is already filled with our biases from the start. So we need mechanical interpretation as early as possible. And it needs to be scalable throughout a whole organization. It needs to be valid, of course, measure what it's supposed to measure. And it needs to be useful as well. So, for example, there's no use in when you have 2 candidates left in a process to do the big assessment center that provides data point on things that you already have found out earlier in the process. So it needs to be useful, and it needs to be non-discriminatory. These are the demands for the tools of RecTech, the RecTech area going forward. I'm thinking I'm a little ahead of my time, but shouldn't matter, right? So, as a conclusion then, what do you need to master? Well, now we talked about data and insights and building the pipe, and it all comes down to we need to be the ones processing the oil, right? We need to be the ones that actually connect the dots and make use of this raw material in terms of data points, and we need to transfer them into insights about, will this person actually do a good job? Does this person have the ability, knowledge and experience to display the behaviors that will lead to success in the role that we are hiring for? So basically that was it. And if you would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, please do so. And since I am ahead of my time, there are room for questions if there are any. No. That's all right. All right, thank you.